Urban Street Tree Biodiversity and Antidepressant Prescriptions by Marcel et al. And the very first two sentences of the abstract, actually, I'll read those. Growing urbanization is a threat to both mental health and biodiversity. Street trees are an important biodiversity component of urban green space, but little is known about their effects on mental health. So, the very short version of what they found is that people living within 100 meters, 300 plus feet or so, of what are called street trees. This is a term of art, I guess, in urban planning, where trees on that strip in front of between residences or sidewalks and streets. People whose homes are within 100 meters, 328 or so feet, of street trees have marginally lower antidepressant use. But if you control for socioeconomic status, which is to say, if you look only at those people with lower socioeconomic status, we actually find this paper finds a remarkable, and this is correlative, of course, a remarkable apparent effect on antidepressant use. And so specifically, the line is, indeed, I don't know where it is in the paper, but I have it in my notes here. Indeed, under high density of street trees at 100 meters or closer, individuals with low socioeconomic status had a similar probability of being prescribed antidepressants as individuals with high socioeconomic status. So that, to me, is kind of staggering, that everyone who thinks about these sorts of things knows, and is well established in a robust, substantial, and rigorous literature, that socioeconomic status is correlated with health outcomes, right? That the richer you are in general, the healthier you are. And of course, there are lots of exceptions to that. But there are concerted efforts, good faith, careful, concerted efforts to try to figure out how to break that. That it's very hard to break poverty. And of course, there are many people trying to do that as well. But there are an additional set of sort of public health efforts to try to figure out what, if poverty, what can we do to try to make sure that being poor does not inherently make you unhealthy? And this finding suggests that simply living fairly close to trees may seriously reduce the risk of at least this one measure of health, which is mental health, which is depression.
So let me help unpack this here. This is a paper I have not read, so I'm going to just riff off of what I'm hearing and see if I can make sense of it. The point is that actually, and so there are obviously multiple levels of entanglement here, and statistics are the tool for untangling which thing is actually correlated to what, and if done in the context of a proper hypothesis, it allows you to assess what might be causal.
Indeed.
And what we have here is an indication that socioeconomic status, which is known to have a positive effect on mental health that can be seen in being less likely to be prescribed drugs for depression,
as found in other pieces of research. That is not the research that these people did.
That is a pre-existing research already established. That if we then look within people of low socioeconomic status, that living within 100 meters of 100 meters of trees actually results in them catching up to levels of high economic well-being. So,
with regard to not being prescribed antidepressants at as high rates as you would expect, simply by virtue of their socioeconomic status.
Which suggests,
I will just, one caveat here is that this research did not hypothesize socioeconomic status being a differential variable going in. They knew, of course, that low socioeconomic status tends to be associated with worse health outcomes. But upon looking at their data, they saw a marginally significant result with regard to proximity to trees and not being prescribed antidepressants at high rates across all demographics, actually. But when they then parsed it out by socioeconomic status, that result became highly significant.
So for the large fraction of our audience that is deeply interested in the philosophy of science, they will spot right away then that what has happened here is that this paper, in testing one hypothesis, has made an observation which leads to the next hypothesis, which is now in need of its own test in order to know whether it is scientifically supported. And so, fascinating, though, that what they appear to have discovered suggests the following model, which is there's something that causes a breakdown in normal function. If we imagine that depression is in some ways a breakdown of normal function, or at least depression that is to the extent that it results in a prescription, that is a dysfunction, and that dysfunction is triggered by something in the change of socioeconomic status from high to low, and that it can be regained by proximity to trees alone, is fascinating, which doesn't say it's the only thing that would do that, but it does say that it's something that we would see. Now, of course, the thing I'm fascinated by, and maybe the paper addresses it, is that some part of us knows that tree-lined streets are good. That's why they are in the rich neighborhoods, and that is why they are very rarely found in impoverished neighborhoods.
It's actually interesting. One thing that they do say, so this research was conducted in Leipzig, Germany, and there is similar but not exactly comparable research that's been done in London that came to the same conclusion, but it was, if memory serves, that research was different in that they were looking only at the aggregate as opposed to very, very much particular households that are living within proximity to street trees and antidepressant use. But so that, there's a growing weight of evidence that finds this. And there is the widespread expectation, and I still believe it must be true in many places, that richer neighborhoods tend to have more trees. But at least in their research, at least here in Leipzig, they didn't find that. They actually did not find that the lower income neighborhoods had fewer trees.
Okay, but that may, I will be shocked if it cannot be demonstrated in the U.S. That the wealthy neighborhoods are much more likely to be tree lined, or the density of their tree lining is greater, or whatever it is, for lots of different reasons. For one, I mean, we could probably list a dozen reasons that should be so. One, people's positive association with trees causes the houses on those streets to be more expensive, which means that people of higher socioeconomic status can afford them. Right. The fact that the tax base is somewhat local is going to mean that there are more resources to do something that actually costs more, like maintaining trees rather than simple pavement. So there are lots of reasons that you would expect that correlation. Now, what the heck is going on?
Okay, sorry, go on.
Well, just that you would expect to find them on the fancier streets for lots. And because there are lots of reasons, we have to be careful here that there's not some third correlate and that this has very little to do with trees. Well, that's a possibility.
It is a possibility. One of the ways that this research differs from all but a couple of pieces of research that came before is that there's been a lot of talking about green space, about the value of green space, about being near, either wild nature, semi-wild nature, parks, etc. And they specifically looked at street trees, which in their language has an advantage in that they can be retrofitted into neighborhoods. That even though you're right, that it of course takes some doing to plant them and then some maintenance, and that especially if you're planting the wrong species of trees that would require a lot of irrigation or something in order to keep them going, once they're past sapling stage, that they would be less likely to persist in neighborhoods where there weren't a lot of resources. But well, that I guess.
Yeah. Well, so what I would love to know is one prediction of this. If the correlation is due to causation, then you would expect that neighborhoods in which trees had been added, that you would see a difference in historical prescription rates over that time. That would be a great result to have.
That would be what's called a matched pairs. That would be a matched pairs experimental design, which would allow you to specifically say, aha, we see a decrease in antidepressant prescription after the addition of trees in these neighborhoods.
I will say couple other things. One, intuitively, this result probably sounds more right to you and me than it deserves on its merits, because this is a complex set of phenomena in which trees are liable to be correlated to dozens of other things, and therefore it could be something else that's lurking in the data, and this would evaporate if you tested the tree hypothesis directly, right? This is more intuitive to you and me because you and I have some kind of, I would argue, unnatural level of need for this. I think you and I would accept a huge decrease in quality of life to live in a place that, looked right out the windows.
That is to say, our values are such that other changes in quality of life that other people would rank more highly as important to them, we would accept so long as we still had the trees out the window.
Yeah.
Or I would say, and this is you alluded to this early in this conversation, but there will certainly be ecosystems in which some cities are where trees isn't the thing. Right, like and it may well be that all humans would enjoy seeing a tree, but if tree-lined streets in LA, for instance, are a different phenomenon because LA happens to be in a place that doesn't really natively have much in the way of trees, and so I would predict that access to some sorts of things that would actually be relevant and natural outside of your window would do something similar. And the obvious thing is water.
Yeah.
Right. Coastlines, rivers, creeks, lakes, ponds, any of that. And of course, as it is is well established, those pieces of real estate, of course, are always belonging to people with higher socioeconomic status.
Well, I want to come back to the question of whether or not we might be on the cusp of a change here as a result of what COVID has forced us to learn, which we probably should have known anyway. But I do agree. I think trees are certainly, if the model that you and I are going to intuit from this is right, then trees are a proxy. It's one of dozens of things that could work, and almost certainly not the best of them. Right. So
why do you think that?
Because, well, personally, I would guess that there is something about the staticness of trees, and trees are not perfectly static, especially deciduous trees are, dynamic at one time scale, and, trees blow in the wind and all of that. But that there are lots of things. So if I just take myself as a model,
Sure.
right? It's cool to see trees out the window, right? But it's like 100 times as cool to see squirrels in the trees. Right. So the dynamism of animals outside that raise questions at a different time scale is, it's positive. I imagine it has a Sudoku-like effect on the mind if you pay attention to the squirrels.
Sudoku-like effect. That's an interesting phrase. I'm with you on that, but I actually suspect that specifically squirrels in trees might be a negative for a lot of people. We've joked about wanting more squirrels, that kind of wanting squirrel monkeys, even in temperate trees and such. And no, we're not going to go introducing species where they don't belong. But I think that many people, especially dyed-in-the-wool urbanites, can accept the grace and beauty of a tree and get a little freaked out by something that's scurrying around in it.
I think squirrels evoke something different for people, but anyway, I'm sure there are some people who.
I know there are some people who don't like squirrels.
There may be, and people who are trying to feed birds often don't like squirrels for other reasons. But
this is different. You're not hanging out with all the urbanites who really don't like it when things run around and they're not people.
Right. I guess that's true. But I would also argue that there's something, there is an underappreciated disaster in light pollution and noise pollution.
Oh, yeah.
And so what we don't remember until it's absent is how different things are mentally when you can't hear a road.